The landscape of the early 1990s. To understand why Nintendo and Sony even considered working together, we need to revisit the gaming industry of the late 1980s and early 1990s. Nintendo's NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, had revived the US gaming market after the crash of 1983. Its follow-up, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, SNES, was a powerhouse of 16-bit gaming, cementing Nintendo as the market leader. Yet as strong as Nintendo's position was, technological change was on the horizon. Cartridges, though fast and reliable, had limitations. They were expensive to manufacture and constrained in storage capacity. Developers were eager for a format that could hold more data, especially as games grew in complexity and artistry. Compact discs, CDs, popularized in the music industry, offered a solution. CDs could hold hundreds of megabytes, were cheap to produce, and opened the door to cinematic audio and full-motion video. Sony, meanwhile, was already a dominant player in consumer electronics, especially audio equipment and CD technology. Though it had dabbled in gaming with its audio chips for consoles, Sony had not yet entered the home gaming market. A partnership with Nintendo, the reigning king of video games, seemed like the perfect entry point. The birth of the partnership. In 1988, Nintendo approached Sony with a proposal. The goal was to create a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. This peripheral, often referred to as the SNES CD, would allow the system to play disc-based games alongside cartridges. Sony, eager to break into gaming, agreed. Ken Kutaragi, a visionary engineer within Sony, became one of the project's driving forces. The partnership was formalized with an agreement. Sony would develop the CD-ROM technology, while Nintendo would provide the games and brand recognition. The arrangement gave Sony an unusually favorable position. Not only would it handle the hardware, but Sony would also retain control of the software licensing for CD-based games. For Nintendo, whose business model relied heavily on controlling game publishing and licensing, this clause was a ticking time bomb. The Nintendo PlayStation prototype. By 1991, Sony had developed working prototypes of a hybrid console. This machine could play both standard SNES cartridges and the new CD-based games. It was sleek, gray, and bore the name PlayStation, spelled as two words. Though never released publicly, it was demonstrated at trade shows and intended for developers to begin experimenting with CD-ROM games. The prototype combined the familiar SNES cartridge slot with a disk drive, signaling a bridge between the past and the future. Had it been released, it might have redefined gaming as we know it. Developers could have harnessed the power of CDs years earlier, potentially accelerating the rise of cinematic gaming. The betrayal at CES 1991. The partnership seemed strong until it wasn't. At the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, in 1991, Sony proudly announced its collaboration with Nintendo and unveiled the PlayStation. What followed was one of the most shocking betrayals in video game history. The very next day, Nintendo announced on stage that it had signed a new partnership with Sony's rival, Philips, to develop a CD-ROM add-on instead. This blindsided Sony, whose executives and engineers had expected to celebrate their achievement. Nintendo's move was driven by fear. The contract gave Sony too much control over licensing, threatening Nintendo's iron grip on the gaming ecosystem. Rather than renegotiate, Nintendo humiliated Sony publicly and severed the partnership. The Philips deal itself would eventually collapse, producing little more than a handful of infamous Zelda and Mario games for the Philips CDI. But the damage to the Nintendo-Sony relationship was permanent. Sony's revenge, the birth of PlayStation. Sony's executives, furious and embarrassed, faced a choice: abandon gaming or strike back. Ken Kutaragi convinced them to pursue the latter. If Nintendo would not share the stage, Sony would create its own console. This decision birthed the original Sony PlayStation. Launched in 1994 in Japan and 1995 worldwide, the PlayStation was everything the Nintendo PlayStation might have been, and more. It embraced CDs, delivered cutting-edge 3D graphics, and targeted an older demographic with sleek marketing. Developers flocked to it, drawn by the affordability of CDs compared to cartridges. The result was a library that defined a generation: Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Gran Turismo, and countless others. By the time the dust settled, the PlayStation had sold over 100 million units, dethroning Nintendo as the industry leader. A betrayal meant to keep Sony out of gaming had instead unleashed its greatest rival. The what-if scenario. The Nintendo PlayStation invites endless speculation. What if Nintendo had stuck with Sony? Would the PlayStation brand even exist today? Would the combined power of Nintendo's first-party franchises and Sony's hardware innovations have created an unstoppable juggernaut? One possibility is that the Nintendo-Sony partnership might have delayed or softened the leap to full 3D gaming. Nintendo's cautious design philosophy could have restrained Sony's more aggressive technological ambitions. Alternatively, the hybrid console might have accelerated the CD revolution, leading to games like Final Fantasy VII appearing years earlier. Another intriguing possibility is that Sega might have survived longer. Without Sony entering the market independently, the Saturn could have competed more effectively with a unified Nintendo-Sony console. The entire trajectory of the console wars would have shifted. Rediscovery of the prototype for decades, the Nintendo PlayStation was thought to be little more than a legend, a footnote in gaming history. That changed in 2015 when a working prototype surfaced in the hands of Terry Diebold, a former employee of a company with ties to Sony. The console, one of fewer than 200 believed to have been made, reignited fascination with this lost chapter of gaming. The prototype was later restored and made functional, capable of playing SNES cartridges and specially developed demo discs. It toured gaming conventions, drawing crowds of fans eager to glimpse the console that could have changed everything. In 2020, the prototype was sold at auction for $360,000, cementing its status as one of the most valuable artifacts in gaming history. Cultural meaning of the console. That never was, the Nintendo PlayStation is more than just a canceled console. It represents a pivotal moment in gaming history where corporate rivalry and short-sightedness reshaped an entire industry. For fans, it is a symbol of alternate history, a reminder that the games and consoles we grew up with were shaped not just by technology, but by boardroom decisions, betrayals, and chance. Its existence also highlights the fragility of collaboration in the gaming world. Nintendo's need for control and Sony's ambition collided, producing a split that defined the industry for decades. Every PlayStation success, from the PS1 to the PS5, can be traced back to the betrayal at CES 1991. Every Nintendo innovation, from the Nintendo 64's cartridge gamble to the Switch's hybrid form, reflects lessons learned from that failed partnership. The Nintendo PlayStation is the greatest console never released. Born from collaboration, destroyed by corporate politics, and resurrected as a prototype decades later, it remains a powerful what-if in the history of gaming. Its story is not just about a machine, but about how alliances and rivalries can shape the destiny of entire industries. By pulling apart the threads of this story, we see how a single betrayal led to one of the most successful gaming brands in history. Had things gone differently, the world of video games might look unrecognizable today. Instead, we live in the timeline where the Nintendo PlayStation never was, but its ghost continues to haunt the industry.